All right. So, this is just a little discussion on my research so far on emotion detection in the singing voice. So, I've got just a couple examples right here of some different audio files that I've split up. Um, Obviously, I've got some real time detection stuff already programmed in, but I thought it would be more interesting to see how it reacts to audio files that are already recorded. So, some that are solo voice art songs with piano accompaniment, solo voice art song with orchestral accompaniment, as well as some different audio split length comparisons for splitting the wave file into different segments, as well as a full choral piece, and lastly, an orchestral example. So, what I've done is gone through and essentially just made it so I can split up audio files into different segments. So if I have a song that's 3 minutes long, it'll split it into 20-second segments or however many segments it takes to fill 3 minutes worth of time in a division of 20 based on whatever split length that I specify. So let's say, for example, I'll look at this one right here by Strauss. So I've got two different audio files. I have a very basic low pass audio filter that simply pulls the vocals out of the foreground. This is the full spectrogram of Alle Seelen by Strauss. And then this is the layered spectrogram. So we have the full spectrum as well as the background and then foreground information. So right here, when we're looking at this full spectrum, these little bright wavy yellow lines, those ones are the voice. So if we look here in Alensky's aria, we can see kind of the different harmonics as it goes higher up in frequency. Interestingly enough, even with a full choral piece, there's still a pretty clear lineup as to where the vocal range lies. I had, just for a test example, I did the Caroline Overture by Beethoven just to see how it would react to instrumental music. Didn't really make much sense, and it didn't really have a good understanding of what exactly was happening. So let's just look at a really basic example. So let's take a look at Alle Seelen. So let's look at just a very small segment like right here at 160 seconds. So at that point, it detected that it was probably sad. What's a little bit different is when the vocals are isolated, the neural network reacts differently to silence more than anything. Like at 180 on here compared to 180 on here, they're both silence except for there's some residual piano chord sound in 180 right here. There's a very tiny bit of a piano chord, whereas in here, it's just complete silence because everything is filtered out except for the vocals. So it reacts differently only to silence, but most other things are generally the same. And usually it thinks that silence is angry for some reason. But if we take a look back at 160, so there's still a little bit of a piano in there. I just wrote a really basic filter. It's nothing super complex, but it was just enough to get the vocals separated. And that's all that I really cared about. Same thing in a very long piece like Lenski's aria, which is about 6.5-ish minutes. There's not really too much of a difference between the two, and the difference is generally understandably blurry, like calm compared to happy. There's a pretty clear line there, whereas calm versus sad or calm versus fearful, that's where it's a little bit strange. So let's take a listen to one of these. So let's listen to this one right here. So let's listen to the unsplit at 20 seconds per se. And the same thing split into 20-second segments with isolated vocals. So my assumption is that the lack of context is essentially a little bit of a driving force when it comes to the musicality. There wasn't quite as clear of a difference when it was just voice and piano, but having the voice and strings, because of just their similar frequency and their timbre, I think the instrumentation creates a little bit of a blur between the isolated and non-isolated vocals. Over here, this is just a difference in comparison across different lengths of segments. Let's take a listen to Lauritsen. So let's say at 120 seconds, for example. So I would argue that sounds pretty happy, and I'll have to rerun the split for that one, but that would be this file right here. And if we skip 2 minutes in, so that's about 20 seconds right there. So surprisingly enough, and even here, there's not too much of a difference. Sadness and fear are so closely related that it's difficult to tell. Same thing with calm versus happy and calm versus sad. Most of the time, it seems to teeter on calm, more often so than it does neutral, which I suppose is understandable. It's difficult to tell between calmness versus sadness, or calmness versus just a very light happiness, I suppose. Whereas with the Carolian Overture, it really just didn't have any idea. So if we listen to the Carolian Overture, obviously there's no vocals to split out for this one. Let's listen to 460. So that sounds calm. Still calm, I suppose. With a longer context, though, that acts a little bit different. So if we listen to 440 here, where it thinks it's sad, we have a little bit more of that melodic minor harmony kind of driving into it. So there's a pretty interesting overview just of what I've found so far. So most of the time, calm seems to be its just base resort if it doesn't have a very clear understanding. And sometimes it's hard to argue whether or not that's not calm based on how a listener would expect to hear it without the context of language, which obviously that's going to make difference in how we perceive it. as well as the fact that it's not parsing anything based on the text, it's just parsing solely off of the Mercapture coefficients and just the timbres of the voice itself. So, I think it's a little bit interesting, but more accuracy training. Obviously, if there was a larger data set, it would be a lot easier to train it to be a little bit more accurate, but right now it sits at about 73% accuracy, and sometimes it's arguable. So, a lot of it, again, obviously emotion comes down to a matter of opinion and context. So, I just thought that would be interesting to take a look at so far.